My wife called me broke in a room full of millionaires, and the man standing beside her laughed because he thought he had already won. The ballroom at the Harrington Capitol Gala glittered like money had learned how to breathe. Crystal chandeliers hung over polished marble floors. Champagne moved through the crowd on silver trays, and every laugh sounded rehearsed, expensive, and slightly cruel. Madison stood 10 feet away from me in a white dress that probably cost more than my first truck, her hand resting lightly on Blake Harrington's arm like she had forgotten whose ring she still wore. Blake was everything men like him practiced being in the mirror. A tailored navy tuxedo, perfect teeth, and a watch loud enough to speak before he did. I had seen him before in photos, in late-night calendar invites, and in hotel receipts. Madison thought I was too ordinary to understand. That night, I did not come to fight. I came to listen. I wore a simple charcoal suit, no designer logo, no gold cuff links, no watch worth discussing. To Madison, that had always been the problem. She wanted a husband who announced himself before entering a room. I was raised to believe the loudest man in the room was usually borrowing power from someone quieter. Still, I felt the cut before she spoke. It was in the way she introduced me to no one. The way her smile brightened for investors and flattened when her eyes passed over me. The way Blake looked me up and down like I was a valet who had wandered too far from the parking garage. A partner from a Boston fund asked Madison if I worked in finance too. She laughed, soft at first, then sharper when Blake leaned in to hear the answer. "Ethan," she said, lifting her champagne flute. "No, Ethan is not my provider. He is my mistake." The circle went still for half a second, the way people pause before deciding whether cruelty is socially acceptable. Blake made that decision for them. He chuckled, placed a hand against his chest, and said, "Relax, Madison. Every rich woman has a broke face." The laughter came in a wave, polished and poisonous. Someone looked at the floor. Someone else smirked into a glass. Madison did not flinch. She smiled, like she had finally introduced me properly. Broke. Small. Safe. Embarrassing. I felt every word she had never said land between us. My pulse did not race. My hands did not shake. I simply set my glass of sparkling water on the nearest table and let the silence inside me get organized. That was something my grandfather taught me when I was 13 years old, standing in a barn in Vermont while snow piled against the doors. "Never answer an insult while it is still warm," he told me. "Let it cool. Then decide whether it deserves a sentence or a signature." Madison never understood that part of my family. She thought quiet meant empty. She thought simple meant poor. She thought the old Ford in our Connecticut driveway meant I had nothing behind me but a salary and a stubborn sense of dignity. She did not know about the Whitmore family trust. She did not know why my name was kept out of glossy magazines, charity walls, and investor decks. She did not know that Blake's $900 million capital raise was still awaiting final review from an investment committee that included the trustee he had just mocked in public. I looked past Madison, past Blake's grin, past the circle of people enjoying the show, and noticed the small black security camera tucked above the ballroom arch. Good, I thought. Let the room remember what mattered. Blake raised his glass toward me like a man offering mercy. "No hard feelings, Ethan. Rooms like this can be intimidating when you do not belong in them." Madison laughed again, and that one hurt more than his words. Not because I loved her less in that moment, but because I finally understood she had already chosen the version of herself that needed me humiliated to feel elevated. I buttoned my jacket slowly, met Blake's eyes, and smiled just enough for him to mistake it for surrender. "You are right," I said, calm as a signed document. "Some rooms tell you exactly who belongs in them." Blake's grin widened. Madison looked satisfied. Neither of them noticed my phone vibrate once in my pocket. Rachel Monroe and I had prepared for that moment days earlier, after the hotel receipts stopped looking like coincidences and Blake's name started appearing where it did not belong. Her message was short: preservation letters sent. Trust counsel ready. Do not engage. I slipped the phone back without looking down again. Across the ballroom, Blake Harrington believed he was standing beside my wife. What he did not know was that he had just walked both of them into the cleanest trap money could buy. I left the gala at 11:17 without raising my voice, without touching Blake, and without giving Madison the scene she probably expected. Men like Blake understand volume. They understand performance. They do not understand restraint, which is why restraint frightens them once they finally recognize it. The valet brought my old Ford around between a line of black Escalades and German sedans polished like museum pieces. I heard someone behind me laugh at the truck, maybe Blake, maybe one of his friends, but I did not turn around. The engine coughed once, then settled into the same steady rumble it had made for 12 years. Madison used to love that sound. Back when we were renting a 2-bedroom townhouse in Stamford and eating takeout on folding chairs, she called it honest. Somewhere between her first luxury listing and her first invitation to a rooftop fundraiser, honest became embarrassing. I drove north through the wet streets, past glass towers and late-night delis, while Manhattan blurred in the windshield like a life I had chosen not to chase. My phone sat face up in the cup holder. 3 missed calls from Madison. One message from her that said, "You made that awkward." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the truth had become too clean to argue with. A woman can stand beside another man, let him mock her husband in public, and still believe the husband is the one who ruined the evening by refusing to bleed on command. I did not answer. Rachel Monroe had been clear. No emotional debates. No late-night explanations. No sentences that could be twisted by a divorce attorney charging $900 an hour to make poison sound reasonable. I took the Merritt Parkway home under a thin Connecticut rain, passing stone walls, bare trees, and houses set far enough back from the road to hide their secrets properly. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house was dark except for the upstairs closet light Madison always forgot to turn off. The place looked peaceful from outside. White siding, slate walkway, hydrangeas cut back for winter, a brass mailbox with our last name on it. Whitmore. She wore that name when it opened doors, then mocked the man who had given it to her when she thought better doors had appeared. I sat in the truck for a full minute before going in, wanting to remember the last moment when the house still pretended to be a home. Inside, the air smelled like her perfume and cold coffee. On the kitchen island sat a shopping bag from a Madison Avenue boutique, a black ribbon curling over the marble like a small confession. I walked past it and went straight to my study. That room had always been mine because Madison found it boring. Dark shelves, old law books from my grandfather, framed photographs of Vermont farmland, a brass desk lamp, and a locked cabinet she had never bothered to ask about. She thought important things looked modern. She did not know old wood could hold more power than glass. I opened the cabinet, took out the red leather binder, and laid it on the desk. Whitmore Family Trust. The name looked quiet on paper, almost plain, but behind it sat commercial real estate, energy holdings, private equity positions, timberland, municipal bonds, and enough layered ownership to make loud men suddenly respectful. $3 billion was not a pile of cash. It was a system, a wall, a machine built over 4 generations by people who understood that money without discipline becomes bait. My grandfather had made me memorize the family rule before I was old enough to drive. Never marry someone who loves the reflection of your life more than the life itself. I thought Madison had passed that test because I never showed her the reflection. I gave her the simple version of me. The consultant. The steady husband. The man with mud on his boots and no interest in country club gossip. For a while, she seemed happy with him. Then Blake Harrington taught her to see simplicity as failure. My laptop opened to a secure inbox. Rachel had sent copies of the 4 preservation notices: Madison, Blake, Harrington Capital, and the event venue. The subject line was cold enough to lower the temperature in the room. Potential spoliation of evidence and notice of litigation hold. I read every word slowly. Hotel records, communications, financial disclosures, internal fund materials, social media messages, surveillance footage from the gala. Nothing dramatic, nothing childish, just doors locking one by one. A second email arrived from Charles Whitmore, my uncle and senior trustee. 6 words. "We are ready when you are." I leaned back in the chair and listened to the house settle around me. Somewhere upstairs, Madison's closet light still burned over rows of dresses bought for rooms where she believed I did not belong. I did not hate her in that moment. Hate is hot, and I had gone cold hours ago. What I felt was worse for her. Clarity. By morning, Madison would start building her story. By noon, Blake would realize this was not a marriage problem anymore. And before the week ended, both of them would learn that the man they called broke had never been powerless. He had only been patient. By the time the sun came up, Madison had not come home. That should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I stood in the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, watching coffee drip into the pot while the house breathed around me like a witness trying not to speak. Her closet light was still on upstairs. Her boutique bag still sat on the island. Her wedding photos still hung in the hallway, both of us smiling beneath a canopy of white roses in Newport, back when she looked at me like I was enough. Memory is cruel that way. It does not arrive with warnings. It comes through ordinary things, a coffee mug, a perfume bottle, a scratch on the dining table from the first Thanksgiving we hosted. I remembered the woman Madison had been before rooms like that Gala started feeding something hungry in her. When I met her, she was 26, selling starter homes in Fairfield County, and driving a used Toyota with a cracked bumper. She wore her ambition honestly then, not as a weapon, not as a costume. She kept index cards in her purse with client names, school districts, mortgage rates, and tiny details she believed mattered because people mattered. On our third date, she spilled coffee on a blue dress before an open house and laughed so hard in the parking lot that I forgot how nervous I was. That was the laugh I married, not the one from last night. Not the sharp little sound she used when Blake turned me into a punchline. Back then, she liked that I lived simply. She said rich people exhausted her. She said the best thing about me was that I never tried to impress strangers. I should have paid attention to the word tried. People change slowly, then all at once. The first shift came after she sold a waterfront estate in Greenwich and got invited to the owner's charity dinner. She came home glowing, not from happiness exactly, but from proximity. She described the marble staircase, the private chef, the women with diamonds at breakfast, and the men who moved markets with phone calls before lunch. I listened because a husband listens. I told her I was proud of her because I was. Success did not threaten me. Hunger did. Over the next 2 years, her world expanded and our marriage narrowed. Dinners became networking. Weekends became important opportunities. A quiet Saturday at home started feeling, to her, like a punishment. The Ford embarrassed her. My plain suits embarrassed her. My refusal to discuss money in public embarrassed her most of all. She began correcting me in front of people, small things at first. Do not say it like that, Ethan. Do not mention Vermont. It sounds rural. Do not tell them you still work with trust compliance. It sounds boring. She called it polish. I called it sanding down the man she had promised to love. Then Blake arrived wearing confidence like cologne. He was a managing partner at Harrington Capital, the kind of man who made eye contact with everyone except waiters. Madison met him at a private equity reception in Midtown. I knew his name before I met his face because it began appearing in her sentences too often. Blake says the market is shifting. Blake thinks luxury buyers are moving south. Blake invited us to a wine dinner. Then, us became me. Then me became a notification lighting her phone at midnight. I did not accuse her. Not then. Marriage deserves more than suspicion, and I had been raised not to swing at shadows. But I started noticing facts. A hotel bar charge on a Tuesday when she said she was showing a house in Westport. A silk scarf I had never seen, folded in tissue from a store on Fifth Avenue. A message preview that disappeared too quickly. You handled him perfectly. Him. I stood in my kitchen that morning with the coffee cooling in my hand and understood something that made the room feel smaller. Madison had not fallen for Blake because he was better than me. She had fallen for the version of herself she got to perform beside him. Expensive, untouchable, desired by powerful people. Free from the quiet husband who knew what she looked like before the diamonds, before the private rooms, before she learned to mistake applause for love. My phone buzzed at 7:12. Not Madison. Rachel. She had forwarded a preliminary summary from the forensic accountant. I opened it expecting receipts and timelines. What I saw made the coffee turn bitter in my mouth. Madison had accessed copies of my old financial disclosures from a mortgage file and sent Blake partial screenshots. He had replied with one sentence that stripped the last softness out of me. If he is hiding family money, we make him bleed in discovery. I set the phone down carefully, because something in me had become very still. Madison wanted a richer life. Blake wanted a back door into one. Neither of them understood they were not digging into my weakness. They were knocking on the vault. By 8 o'clock, the house had become too quiet to trust. I was standing in my study with Rachel's report open on the laptop when the garage door rumbled beneath my feet. Madison was home. Not sneaking, not rushing, not ashamed. The door into the kitchen opened, and I heard the soft click of her heels on hardwood, measured and confident. like she had spent the night rehearsing how innocent should sound. I closed the laptop, slipped the printed report into the red leather binder, and walked out before she could call my name. She stood by the island in last night's white dress, a camel coat over her shoulders, and sunglasses pushed into her hair. Her makeup was perfect in the way damage can be covered but not erased. The boutique bag was still on the marble between us. So was the silence. Madison looked at me for 3 full seconds, then sighed like I had inconvenienced her. "You left me there," she said. Not an apology, an accusation. I almost admired the nerve. A lesser man might have exploded. A younger version of me might have asked where she slept, why Blake's hand had been on her back, why humiliation seemed to make her glow. But the man standing in that kitchen was done begging reality to explain itself. I poured coffee into a mug and said, "You were not alone." Her jaw tightened. Just a small movement, but marriage teaches you the language of small movements. She placed her clutch on the counter. "Do not do this, Ethan. Not today. Last night was complicated." Complicated. That was the word people use when simple truth makes them look guilty. I leaned against the sink and watched rain crawl down the window over the backyard. The lawn was clean, the hedges trimmed, the patio furniture covered for winter. From outside, our life still had shape. Inside, it had become paperwork waiting for signatures. Madison took off her coat, draped it over a chair, and softened her voice. That was another performance I knew well. The gentler tone came out whenever she needed something. Blake was joking. "You know how those rooms are. People tease. You made it heavier than it had to be." I looked at her then, really looked at her. The woman who once kept mortgage rate flashcards in her purse now spoke about public disrespect like it was a networking strategy. "He called me broke," I said. You laughed. Her eyes flicked away. "Because you stood there looking like you hated everyone. You never try, Ethan. You walk into powerful rooms dressed like you are going to a county courthouse. You make no effort to be impressive, then act wounded when people do not treat you like you are." There it was. Not the affair. Not the lie. The deeper wound. She was embarrassed that I refused to perform wealth for people who worshipped it. I set the mug down. "Is that why you sent Blake my private financial records?" Her face changed before she could stop it. A blink too slow. A breath too shallow. The kitchen lights seemed to hum louder. "I do not know what you mean," she said. I nodded once. "That is a mistake. Lying only works when the other person still needs to believe you." Color rose in her cheeks, but she kept control. "I was trying to understand our finances. I am your wife. You sent private records to a man who wants to use them against me in a divorce you have not admitted you are planning." The words landed clean. Madison's fingers curled around the edge of the island. For the first time since she walked in, she looked less certain of the floor beneath her. "Vanessa talks too much," she whispered. That name told me enough. Vanessa was one of Madison's friends from the real estate circle, the only one who still looked uncomfortable when Blake joked at my expense. Rachel had not mentioned her yet. Madison just had. I filed it away without moving a muscle. "So there is a plan," I said. Madison straightened quickly, angry now because fear had shown its face. "There is a future, Ethan. One you keep refusing to build. Blake understands scale. He understands ambition. You hide behind old family stories and a consulting income like dignity pays for anything in this world." I almost told her then. I almost opened the red binder and let $3 billion sit between us like a judge. But that would have been emotion, and emotion was exactly what Rachel told me not to spend. So I stayed quiet. Madison mistook that silence for defeat. She stepped closer, voice low and sharp. "You should be careful. If this turns into a legal fight, discovery can be very uncomfortable for men who pretend to have nothing." That was the moment the last door closed inside me. Quietly. Completely. I picked up my phone, opened Rachel's contact, and sent one sentence. "Move forward." Madison watched my thumb hit send. "Who was that?" she asked. I slid the phone into my pocket and walked past her toward the study. "Someone who understands scale." Behind me, the kitchen went silent. For years, Madison had believed I was the small life she had outgrown. By sunset, she would begin to understand that she had not married beneath her. She had betrayed above her. By noon, Madison had locked herself in the primary bedroom and started making calls. I could hear her voice through the ceiling when I passed beneath it, controlled at first, then sharper, the way expensive glass sounds right before it cracks. She was not calling me. She was calling Blake. That told me everything about the order of her loyalties. I sat in my study with the door closed, the red leather binder on my desk, and Rachel Monroe on speakerphone. Rachel did not waste words. That was one of the reasons I hired her before Madison knew I needed her. "The preservation letters have been delivered," she said. Harrington Capital acknowledged receipt at 9:42. The venue confirmed they have secured last night's security footage. Blake has not responded through counsel yet, but he will. I looked toward the ceiling as Madison's voice rose, muffled but frantic. "He is responding through her," I said. Rachel paused for half a second. "Then do not interrupt them. People under pressure create records. Let them." That sentence settled over the room like a rule carved into stone. Let them. For years, I had stepped in whenever Madison panicked. Late closings, angry clients, blown commissions, credit cards she promised were business expenses, apologies she hated giving. I had been the quiet floor beneath her. Now I was stepping aside, and she was discovering what gravity felt like. Rachel walked me through the next steps. A divorce petition would be drafted that afternoon. A temporary restraining order would protect marital accounts from sudden withdrawals. A forensic accountant would review and preserve bank records, credit card trails, and electronic communications. Trust counsel would remain separate because the Whitmore family trust was not a marital piggy bank, no matter what Madison had been told by a man with a tailored suit and a hungry fund. "The trust is insulated," Rachel said. "But her attempt to access information matters. His attempt to use her matters more." I opened the preliminary timeline. On my laptop, dates lined up like fence posts. Madison's first private dinner with Blake in May. Her first payment to a high-limit credit card I had never seen in June. Her request for my old mortgage disclosures in July. Blake's fund pitch to a Whitmore-affiliated office in August. Madison forwarding him partial screenshots in September. A weekend at a Boston hotel in October, described to me as a women's real estate retreat. By November, Blake had sent her a message that made my jaw tighten without raising my pulse. "Once I understand what he is attached to, we can force daylight." Force daylight. Men like Blake loved phrases that made greed sound strategic. "There is something else," Rachel said. Harrington Capital is currently raising money for a $900 million real estate credit vehicle. One of their target investors is a feeder entity connected to your family office. I stared at the screen. The room did not move, but the meaning of it did. Blake had not wandered into my marriage by accident. He had found Madison useful. Maybe flattering her had been easy. Maybe embarrassing me had been entertainment. But underneath all of it, he had been circling a door with my family's name on it. "Does he know?" I asked. "Not fully," Rachel said. "From what we have, he appears to suspect you are connected to old money, but he does not know your authority level. He thinks Madison can help him pressure you or expose hidden assets in divorce discovery." I almost smiled. Arrogance is a kind of blindness people mistake for vision. Blake thought discovery was a flashlight he could shine into my life. He did not understand that some structures are built by people who expect storms. The Whitmore Trust had survived market crashes, lawsuits, divorces, jealous relatives, and men far smarter than Blake Harrington. It did not panic because a real estate agent with a designer closet had married into the surname and grown bored with discretion. Above me, Madison's bedroom door opened. Her heels crossed the floor, fast now. Then the stairs. Then the hallway. She entered my study without knocking, phone clenched in her hand, eyes bright with anger dressed as confidence. "Blake says those letters are intimidation," she said. Rachel had gone silent on the speaker, but she was still there. I let Madison talk. "He says you are trying to scare me because you know a judge will not like whatever you are hiding. He says if you had real money, you would not live like this." I looked around my study, at the old books, the Vermont photographs, the plain desk my grandfather had used for 40 years. This, she thought, was evidence of failure. "What else did Blake say?" I asked. Madison stepped closer. "He said men like you only understand pressure." Rachel's voice came through the speaker then, calm enough to freeze the air. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Rachel Monroe, counsel for your husband. You should retain independent legal representation before making any further statements." Madison's face emptied. Not went pale. Emptied. Like someone had pulled the performance out of her and left the person underneath exposed. Her eyes dropped to the red binder on my desk, then to the phone, then back to me. For the first time, she seemed to understand that I had not been reacting to her. I had been documenting her. She backed out without another word. A minute later, the front door closed. Through the window, I watched her white Mercedes pull down the driveway too fast, probably headed toward Blake, probably carrying half-truths and panic into the one room where both could become evidence. Rachel exhaled softly on the line. "That was useful," she said. I watched the taillights disappear beyond the hedges. "I know," I said. And for the first time since the gala, the silence in the house did not feel empty. It felt prepared. Madison did not come back that afternoon. She did what frightened people do when they still believe panic can be dressed up as strategy. She went to Blake. By late afternoon, Rachel's office had confirmation from a licensed process server that Madison had been served with the divorce petition at Harrington Capital's private client entrance on Park Avenue. Not because I wanted spectacle, but because she had chosen to take our marriage problem into his workplace. Choices have addresses. Consequences know how to find them. I spent the afternoon in a conference room at Monroe Legal Group, 12 floors above downtown Stamford, with rain tapping the windows and boxes of documents stacked along the wall. Rachel sat across from me in a gray suit, reading glasses low on her nose, while a forensic accountant named Peter Lang moved through financial records with the calm patience of a surgeon. He was not dramatic. Good accountants never are. They ruin people with columns. "This is the high-limit card," Peter said, sliding a spreadsheet toward me. "Opened 10 months ago. Paid from her business account, but several charges appear personal. Hotels, private dining, travel upgrades, jewelry, and event expenses. Some of those dates line up with Mr. Harrington's calendar based on material your investigator preserved." I looked at the numbers. $48,000 at a boutique hotel group. $19,000 in designer purchases. $12,000 for a members-only club in Manhattan I had never entered. None of it surprised me. The betrayal had already landed. This was just the receipt. Rachel pointed to another page. "The larger issue is not the affair. Courts see affairs every day. The larger issue is intent, financial misconduct, and his connection to a capital raise involving your family's feeder entity." Peter clicked his pen once. "There are messages indicating she was trying to obtain information about your assets under the belief it would help Mr. Harrington identify leverage." Leverage. Another clean word for dirty hands. I leaned back and watched traffic crawl below us, red brake lights shining on wet pavement. A year earlier, I would have made excuses for Madison. Stress, ambition, bad friends. A marriage stretched thin by two people who stopped speaking the same language. But messages do not happen by accident. Screenshots do not forward themselves. Hotel reservations do not appear from loneliness alone. At 3:15, Rachel's paralegal brought in printed copies of the gala footage summary. The venue had preserved 3 camera angles: ballroom entrance, northeast bar, and charity donor wall. Audio was limited, but the visual record was enough. Madison standing beside Blake. Blake, leaning close. The circle turning toward me. The laughter. My own face calm enough to look almost bored. "That helps," Rachel said. "It shows public humiliation, but more importantly, it shows him inserting himself into the marital conflict. If he later claims no involvement, this makes that harder." I nodded. I was learning that the law did not need rage to be powerful. It needed sequence. Who knew what? Who sent what? Who benefited? Who lied after being warned? Around 4 o'clock, Charles Whitmore joined by secure video from Boston. He looked exactly as he always did. White hair, navy jacket, expression carved from New England stone. He had managed family assets longer than Blake had been alive, and he had the tired patience of a man who had seen greedy people mistake discretion for weakness. "Ethan," he said, "the investment committee has suspended all review of Harrington Capital's proposal. Compliance has been notified. Outside Securities Counsel is evaluating whether Mr. Harrington used improper channels to solicit confidential family information through your spouse." The room seemed to narrow around those words. They were the first visible stones in the avalanche. Rachel asked, "Will the trust cooperate if a regulatory inquiry opens?" Charles did not blink. "Fully. We have no interest in protecting a fund manager who approaches our capital through a trustee's marriage." There it was. The line Blake had crossed without understanding the ground beneath it. He had not flirted his way into gossip. He had stepped into a regulated financial structure with documented communications, a pending capital raise, and a conflict of interest big enough to cast a shadow over his whole firm. Madison had wanted to stand beside power. She had chosen a man who rented the appearance of it. At 5:30, my phone lit up with her name. Then Blake's. Then Madison again. Rachel saw the screen and shook her head. Do not answer. I turned the phone face down. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the city polished and cold. Peter gathered the spreadsheets. Charles signed off with one final sentence. Protect the trust. In the marriage cleanly. I sat there for a moment. After the screen went dark. Cleanly. That was the word. Not cruelly. Not with petty revenge or public screaming. Madison and Blake had mistaken my silence for confusion. In reality, silence had given every professional in that room space to work. By morning, Harrington Capital would know its $900 million raise had a problem. By the end of the week, Blake would know that problem had my last name on it. And Madison would learn that the most expensive mistake she ever made was assuming I needed to look powerful in order to be powerful. The mediation was scheduled for Friday morning in a glass conference room overlooking the Stanford courthouse. Madison arrived 12 minutes late in a cream blazer, pearl earrings, and the composed expression of a woman who had practiced looking wounded in the mirror. Blake came with her, which told me his judgment was already failing. He was not her attorney, not family, and not neutral. Douglas had objected twice before the session began, but Madison had signed a limited consent allowing Blake to sit in for the joint opening conference only, calling him a financial advisor. Blake also signed a non-party confidentiality acknowledgement before the mediator allowed him into the room, and the mediator placed his limited role on the record. Rachel did not fight it. A man willing to walk into a confidential room without understanding confidentiality was already useful. Rachel sat to my right with two folders, one blue, one red. I wore the same charcoal suit from the gala, pressed clean, plain as a closed door. Madison glanced at it and almost smiled, as if the suit confirmed the story she needed to believe. Her attorney, Douglas Klein, began with the usual language about settlement, privacy, emotional strain, and avoiding unnecessary conflict. Then Madison spoke before he could stop her. I gave Ethan years of my life, she said. He kept me small. He hid things. He made me feel guilty for wanting more. Her voice trembled, but her hands were steady. That mattered. Blake leaned back beside her, one ankle over his knee, performing patience for an audience already measuring him. Madison continued, I want the Greenwich house, temporary support, my car, my business accounts untouched, and a fair disclosure of any family money he concealed during the marriage. Rachel made a note without looking up. Douglas cleared his throat. We are not accusing Mr. Whitmore of wrongdoing at this stage, but we do believe there are unresolved questions about asset access and lifestyle inconsistencies. Legal perfume sprayed over greed. Madison looked directly at me. You can't act broke forever, she said. Not when a court is involved. Blake gave a small laugh. Transparency usually fixes men like him. The room tightened. Rachel placed her pen down. Mr. Harrington, since you are choosing to participate verbally, are you appearing today as a financial advisor, a romantic partner, or a representative of Harrington Capital? Blake's smile thinned. Douglas turned fast. Blake, don't answer that. But the damage had already started walking. Rachel opened the blue folder. For the record, we object to Mr. Harrington's presence in any negotiation involving confidential marital finances, given evidence that he received private financial records from Mrs. Whitmore and may have used that information in connection with a pending capital raise. Madison blinked. Blake sat up. Rachel slid 3 printed pages across the table. These are screenshots voluntarily preserved from Mrs. Whitmore's communications. They reference Mr. Whitmore's old mortgage disclosures, suspected family assets, and Mr. Harrington's phrase, we can force daylight. Madison whispered. That was taken out of context. Rachel nodded. Then context will be welcome in discovery. She opened the red folder next. It was a limited certified trust summary, stamped, notarized, redacted, and devastating in its calmness. Rachel turned the redacted cover page toward Madison, Douglas, and the mediator. From where Blake sat, he could see only the header and my name beneath the trustee section, not the protected asset figure, but that was enough. Whitmore Family Trust. Estimated managed assets, over $3 billion, exact figure redacted. Trustees, Charles Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore, Ethan Whitmore. Madison stared. at my name as if the letters had rearranged gravity. Blake leaned forward, his face losing color by inches. Rachel spoke softly. The trust is a separate family asset, established before the marriage, governed by independent trustees, protected by spendthrift provisions, and not subject to division as marital property. Mr. Whitmore did not conceal marital income. He declined to perform wealth for social approval. Blake found his voice first. That document doesn't prove he controls investor decisions. Rachel looked at him almost kindly. Actually, Mr. Harrington, that is precisely why we are all still seated. I turned to Blake for the first time since entering the room. You thought you were walking into my divorce, I said. You were walking into my boardroom. His jaw tightened. Madison looked from him to me, and I saw understanding arrive too late to save her. She had not upgraded her life. She had delivered herself, and him, to the one signature Blake could not afford to offend. For 3 seconds after I spoke, nobody moved. The mediator, a retired judge with silver hair and the expression of a man who had seen 1,000 marriages end badly, looked down at the redacted trust summary, then back at Blake as if he had just watched someone step onto thin ice in expensive shoes. Madison's attorney recovered first. Douglas Klein reached for the red folder carefully, not like a man taking evidence, but like a man checking whether the floor was still there. We will need time to review the structure, he said. Rachel did not blink. Of course, the trust documents themselves will be reviewed under appropriate confidentiality protections. What matters today is that Mrs. Whitmore's demand for access to trust assets is legally unsupported, and Mr. Harrington's involvement creates a separate concern. Blake pushed his chair back an inch. Not enough to leave. Enough to pretend he still had choices. This is absurd, he said. I never asked Madison to steal anything. Rachel opened another folder. No one used that word. The trap tightened because he had named the thing before anyone else did. Madison turned toward him, confusion cutting through the polish on her face. Blake, she said softly. What does she mean by separate concern? He ignored her and looked at Rachel. You are trying to make a business issue out of a private relationship. Rachel slid a new packet across the table. Your firm submitted revised materials to a Whitmore-affiliated feeder entity 11 days after Mrs. Whitmore sent you partial financial records from her husband's files. Those revised materials included language addressing family office privacy concerns that was not present in the earlier draft. Compliance will determine whether that timing is innocent. The mediator removed his glasses. Douglas leaned toward Madison and whispered something I could not hear, but her face told me enough. She had arrived expecting settlement pressure. She was now hearing words like compliance, feeder entity, and confidentiality, words that did not care about tears. Blake's confidence began to peel at the edges. Every fund revises materials, he said. That is normal. Rachel nodded. Then the review should clear that up. Ordinary men fear accusations. Men like Blake fear reviews. Reviews have emails, calendars, drafts, metadata, and assistants who remember being asked to send things after business hours. I had spent my adult life around regulated money. It does not move on charm. It moves on records. Rachel continued, voice level, almost gentle. As of this morning, the Whitmore Investment Committee has suspended evaluation of Harrington Capital's real estate credit vehicle. Outside Securities Counsel has been retained. If evidence supports misuse of confidential information, improper solicitation, or misrepresentations connected to the offering, the matter may be referred to the appropriate regulators. Madison's hand went to her throat. Blake finally looked at her, not with love, not even concern, but blame arriving early. She saw it. I know she did, because her shoulders lowered half an inch, like someone had cut one string holding her upright. You said this was just leverage, she whispered. Blake's eyes flashed. Do not start. There it was, the first crack between them. Not loud enough for the hallway, but loud enough for a marriage to hear from. Across the table, Rachel turned to Douglas. Mr. Whitmore is prepared to resolve the divorce cleanly. The Greenwich house was purchased with marital funds and can be addressed through standard, equitable distribution. Mrs. Whitmore's business accounts can be reviewed. Reasonable temporary arrangements are available, but there will be no trust access, no inflated settlement based on speculative family assets, and no private negotiation involving Mr. Harrington. Douglas looked tired suddenly. Smart lawyers know when a fantasy has become a liability. He nodded once. We should caucus. The mediator agreed, then looked toward Blake. Mr. Harrington, your consent allowed you to attend the joint opening conference only. You will wait outside while counsel meets privately. Blake's jaw tightened, but even he understood that arguing with a retired judge in that moment would only make him look smaller. Madison stood too quickly, her chair scraping against the carpet. Blake reached for her elbow before she stepped away from the table. She pulled free. It was small, but it told the room the weather had changed. Before Madison and Douglas followed the mediator out, Madison looked at me. Not angry this time. Searching, like she was trying to find the man she had mocked beneath the man who had just ended her strategy. Ethan, she said, why did you never tell me? I could have said because trust is earned. I could have said because you love the door more than the person holding the key. I could have said 100 true things designed to wound her back. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. Because money was never supposed to be the reason you stayed. Her eyes filled, but I did not move toward her. Blake did, and she stepped away from him too. The mediator led Madison and Douglas into the smaller caucus room across the hall, while Blake was directed to the waiting area outside the conference rooms. The door closed with a soft mechanical click. Rachel leaned back, capped her pen, and looked at me. Now they have to answer for each other. Through the frosted privacy glass near the hallway, I could see Blake pacing with his phone in his hand. Inside the caucus room, Madison stood with her arms folded, no longer beside him, no longer safely across from me. The beautiful story they had built together was losing oxygen. He had promised her scale. She had promised him access. Neither had delivered. Outside the conference room windows, courthouse traffic moved in slow lines under a gray Connecticut sky. Inside, the law kept doing what the law does best when handed clean facts. It separated property from fantasy, marriage from manipulation, and consequence from revenge. By the time the caucus ended, Blake would have fewer exits, Madison would have fewer illusions, and I would have one thing I had not felt in years: control. The caucus lasted 26 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand move around the conference room clock while Rachel reviewed settlement language and the retired judge moved between rooms with the patience of a man who had spent a career watching people confuse pride with strategy. Madison's voice rose twice from the caucus room across the hall. Blake's cut through once from the waiting area, sharp and ugly, before Douglas shut the door tighter. It was strange how fast an alliance can age when the money disappears. That morning, they had walked in like partners. Less than an hour later, they sounded like two strangers fighting over who had sold whom the bad map. When the caucus room door finally opened, Madison came out first. Her cream blazer was still perfect, but her face had changed. The woman from the gala had been polished by attention. This woman looked scraped clean by facts. Blake was waiting several steps away near the hallway, phone in hand, jaw tight, no longer touching her, no longer smiling. Douglas returned to the main conference room and spoke carefully. Madison would withdraw all claims connected to the Whitmore family trust. Temporary support would be based only on verifiable marital income. The Greenwich house would be sold or bought out under a standard appraisal. Her business expenses would be reviewed. Any shared accounts would remain frozen except for ordinary bills approved through counsel. It was not revenge. It was math. Rachel nodded, made 3 edits, and slid the papers back. Blake tried once more to sound like himself from the doorway, though nobody had invited him back to the table. This does not end anything, he said. No one answered right away. Then Rachel looked at him over her glasses. For you, Mr. Harrington, that may be true. 2 weeks later, Harrington Capital announced that Blake was taking an indefinite leave pending an internal compliance review. A month after that, the capital raise he had bragged about at the gala was quietly pulled from the market. Investors do not like smoke, even before they see fire. Outside Securities Counsel contacted Rachel twice, and weeks later, a preliminary regulatory inquiry requested preserve communications through proper channels. I did not celebrate. I cooperated. There is a difference. Madison moved into a rented condo near Norwalk with furniture too white to look comfortable. She sent one long email, then another, then a handwritten letter delivered by certified mail. The first blamed Blake. The second blamed pressure. The letter finally sounded like her, or maybe like the version of her that existed before applause taught her a new language. She wrote that she had confused ambition with worth, that she had laughed because she was afraid of being laughed at, and that she never knew how much she had traded away until the room went silent. I read it once at my kitchen table, folded it back into the envelope, and gave it to Rachel for the file. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. One clears your heart. The other opens the door. I was willing to do the first. I was not foolish enough to do the second. The divorce was finalized in early spring. We stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, just the two of us for half a minute, while lawyers spoke near the elevators and rain streaked the tall windows. Madison looked smaller without Blake beside her, but not because she lacked beauty or intelligence. She looked smaller because the story she had told herself had collapsed, and for the first time in years, there was no audience to rebuild it for her. Was any of it real? She asked me. I thought about the townhouse in Stamford, the cracked Toyota, the coffee on her blue dress, and the woman who once said rich people exhausted her. Some of it was, I said. That is what made the rest hurt. Her eyes filled, but she nodded like she deserved the answer. In the parking lot, Blake was waiting beside a black sedan, arguing into his phone. He had apparently come expecting her to leave with him. Madison walked toward him, then stopped when she heard him say her name like a liability. Not Madison, not even Maddie, just liability. She turned on him then, not with drama, but with the stunned anger of someone finally seeing the invoice for a fantasy. I did not stay to hear the rest. Rachel and I walked to my Ford, the old engine turning over on the second try like always. She asked where I was headed. I looked east, toward the highway, toward Vermont, toward clean air and land that did not care about status. Home, I said. The Whitmore Trust remained intact. The house was sold. Madison had signed the final settlement. Blake's career became a cautionary whisper in rooms he used to command. And me? I learned that peace is not something you find after everyone apologizes. Sometimes peace is what is left when the wrong people finally lose access to you. My grandfather used to say, "What's done in the dark always comes to light." He was right. In the end, lies need an audience, money needs discipline, and dignity needs no witness.